Welcome, Dr. Epic here, and it is now time to sing. When the moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter aligns with Mars, then peace will guide the planets and love will steer the stars. This is the dawning of the Age of Aquarius. The Age of Aquarius. 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 The place is Boomer America, and the time is the Age of Aquarius. And when we talk about the Age of Aquarius, we're going to talk about baby care and rock and roll and beatniks, the high priest of acid, the Merry Pranksters, music, free love, flower children, and all the things that are in that outline right up above my head. And I would strongly recommend you put that down to serve as a framework for the information that's about to follow as we gather together the information we'll need to answer that question. Evaluate the historical legacy of the baby boomers. Are they social revolutionaries who remade a better, more equal, more liberated America, or spoiled, self-indulgent narcissists who ruined the prosperous country they inherited? Using the history presented here from 1960 to the present, argue from one of these two perspectives, or another if you wish. Did the baby boomers save or squander the legacy of America? So, who are the boomers? Who are the boomers? Well, that's the boomers. The boomers are a generation of Americans, mostly born between 1946 and 1964, during the baby boom. They share the memories, the experiences of growing up in the 1950s, the hippie flower power of the 1960s, the murder of John F. Kennedy, the fighting in Vietnam, the moon landings, the disco malaise of the 1970s, the Reagan Revolution, the Cold War, and the coming of the 21st century. So America fights World War II, all the GIs come home, they get married, they get jobs, and they have kids. A lot of kids. Between 1946 and 1964, the average American woman would give birth 4 times. 76 million babies are born between 1946 and 1964. This is the baby boom. Now, the baby boom created this permanent bulge in American demography that can be easily seen in any population statistics. That bulge you see right up above my head, that's the baby boom. By sheer numbers, the boomers were going to change the country. And they were born during a period of unrivaled prosperity in America. In the 1950s and 60s, that's what the economy was doing. Up, up, up. In the 1950s and 60s, the American economy tripled. Unemployment averaged an incredibly low 4.5%. Home ownership was widespread and easy to come by. And the United States had become a majority middle-class nation. And in this period, there were no major wars, there were no major economic downturns. It's the golden age of the 1950s and 60s. And it was, growing up in this period, kind of an idyllic childhood. There was very little hunger and want. There were stay-at-home mothers. And one had a bunch of brothers and sisters. And not just brothers and sisters, but there's a lot of children everywhere. Impromptu baseball games, camping in the backyard, playing cowboys and Indians. There's kids everywhere. And these people who'd come back from the war, who were raising these children, they wanted expert opinions on the best way to do this. And this led to one of the most influential books in American history, Dr. Spock's Baby and Child Care, published 1957. Now, Dr. Benjamin Spock wrote this book on baby and child care. And he wrote it as a way to kind of make better children and a better form of parenting. And what Dr. Spock basically argued is that you should indulge your children. You shouldn't spank them, you shouldn't beat them, you should barely punish them. Dr. Spock's philosophy was that children kind of already know how to raise themselves, and parents shouldn't be these stern disciplinarians, but rather nurturers who just kind of step in when needed. But children, more or less, should be allowed to raise themselves. And that's what they did. The children played. They played baseball, cowboys and Indians. They watched a lot of this new invention, television. In fact, some people argued the boomers were basically raised by television, and it's Dr. Spock's fault. And so this was childhood in the 1950s. Davy Crockett, toy guns. Of course, there's the good humor man selling ice cream from his van, because there's always going to be kids around, all right? The family sitting around watching television. This was childhood in the 1950s. And there were a lot of kids. This is kind of boggling to today's society, but there were basically children everywhere. Think about it for a second. If you've got your average, block of houses in the suburbs, there might be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There might be 10 houses on this block. And if you've got an average of 4 kids each, that's 40 children in one suburban block. There are kids everywhere. And an entire youth culture grew up around these children. Boy Scouts, the Mickey Mouse Club, people riding bikes all over the place. There were youth activities everywhere. There was always people to play with. And because of Dr. Spock, these babies, these kids more or less raised themselves, and they raised each other independently of what was going on in the outside world. And this was life in the 1950s. Now, there were clearly problems. There were real problems in the 1950s. But these were kind of problems that existed in the background. There's the long Cold War with Soviet Russia dragging on throughout the 1950s and 60s, occasionally intensifying. But all of this Cold War communist stuff was just kind of like background noise, all right? It was mostly confined to like faraway places with like funny names like Greece or Korea or Guatemala, or just kind of generalized abstracted fears like atomic war, especially after the Soviets exploded their own atom bomb in 1949. And this was manifested in funny ways, like, the infamous duck and cover training, where they trained children how best to protect yourself from a nuclear bomb. There's Yertle the turtle teaching you to duck and cover. Just get down on the ground and cover your head. That'll protect you from an atomic bomb. It doesn't protect you from an atomic bomb. And the Soviets were on the move. Soviet Union launches the world's first artificial satellite, Sputnik, 1957, clearly indicating that the communists are every bit as scientifically and technologically advanced as the super high-tech Americans. So there were these problems in the background, this sort of looming threat from the communists, this sort of generalized domestic disturbances, the burgeoning civil rights era. Remember, Brown v. Board of Education comes along in 1954. And across the nation throughout the 1950s, these civil rights marches took place. But again, the kids are confined to the suburbs, all right? So things like Dr. King and Emmett Till and the riding on the Pettus Bridge, that was things that took place in other places with other people, involving issues that most of these children didn't understand and could barely grasp. And everybody lived in these really isolated suburbs, far away from Jim Crow or the really ugly racism of the big cities. And so growing up, they only slowly became aware of these problems, all right? Problems like, the casual sexism of the day. Women have babies and stay in the kitchen, all right? And a ketchup bottle, so easy, even a woman can open it. And the soul-crushing conformism of the 1950s, where if you wore a colored tie or a bit of facial hair, you would be shunned and shamed by your contemporaries. You're allowed 5 types of ties and 6 different styles of gray or black overcoat. Everybody dressed the same. Casual sexism, atomic war, casual chauvinism. So these problems are there, but they're kind of in the background. And only slowly did these sort of boomers become aware of these problems. problems like, dad is going through a bottle of whiskey every 5 days, or that mom has her little box of pep pills, mommy's little helper. And as the 1950s turned into the 1960s, these baby boomers slowly became aware of all of the dissatisfaction in American society. They began to see the cracks in the picture window. And very slowly, especially in the early 1960s, this dissatisfaction would eventually grow and it would blossom into a full-fledged counterculture movement. The children would rebel against the world of their parents. And it all started with music. There was this fusion of musical styles in the 1950s. Jazz and swing were melding together with country bluegrass to form this kind of wild new music. A New Jersey disc jockey named Alan Freed aggressively promoted this new type of music. He called it rock and roll. And there's Alan Freed's Rock and Roll Dance Party. Now, these early rock bands played in these wild new styles, generally centered around a recent instrument, the electric guitar, which itself had only been invented in the 1930s. So this rock music put the electric guitar at the center, and they played this wild music. This was music for young people, performed by young people. And these early rock and rollers were on fire. They were incredible. I mean, Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly, Jerry Lee Lewis. You would be well served to kind of go back and give these early guys a lesson. It's a real jazzy, a real swingy rock and roll, but it was wild stuff for the 1960s. It was originally dismissed as race music, but rock and roll proved to be a break and a release from the strong cultural conformity of the 1950s. The teenagers of the day embraced it as their own, much to the consternation of their parents, who could barely understand what this music was about. Radio and television catered exclusively to the tastes of these teenagers. And the important thing is that the music was crossing racial lines, with black rockers playing for integrated audiences. This wasn't just race music, it was a whole new thing. And at the same time, this was accompanied by this sort of celebration of the image of the rebel busting out against society, rebelling against the kind of soul-crushing conformity of the 1950s. You have these movies, and at the center of these movies is this image of the young, dissatisfied rebel. Too cool for school, man. This was James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, or, much more influential, a very young and very sexy Marlon Brando in the film The Wild Ones, where he plays Johnny, the rebel biker. And there's a great scene in Wild Ones where, Johnny, that's him right up above me, Johnny is sitting there with a cigarette, and the pretty, 50s teenage girl goes to him, and she's like, "Johnny, what are you rebelling against?" And Marlon Brando looks her in the eyes and goes, "What do you got?" All right? So the rebels and the music, all of this comes together into one figure, the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, whose first record comes out in 1956. And Elvis used this image of the sexy rebel. He played black music to white teenagers, and he did it all while dancing and rocking out on television. Despite calls for shutting him down on moral grounds, very famously, a lot of television stations refused to shoot Elvis Presley from a full figure. They would only shoot him from the waist up because he would thrust with his hips. So despite calls for shutting Elvis down on moral grounds, they never succeeded. Once Elvis starts playing on television, the rock and roll genie is out of the bottle, and there's no stopping this music. And right behind Elvis came the Beatles in 1964 with the rest of the British invasion. These British rock and roll acts making it big in the United States. and they made it huge. The Beatles were massive. They played accompanied by frenzied crowds of young girls in fits of what was called Beatlemania. There's Beatlemania right there. The Beatlemania got so intense that the Beatles actually had to travel in armored cars to their shows to avoid being like swamped by, these hordes of teenage girls. But it wasn't just music. Other things were happening as well, particularly in literature. And into this atmosphere of rebellion and rebels and rock and roll came the Beats, the Beat generation, the beatniks. And the beatniks provided a real intellectual and artistic heft to these rebellious youth. And the beatniks urged a rejection of middle-class convention in favor of open sexuality and exploration of the self using drugs. The beatniks wrote weird and wild books, and they rejected convention in all its forms. And a lot of these old beatnik books are really quite good. Jack Kerouac's On the Road, Allen Ginsberg's poems Howl and Kaddish, and if you really want to read a trippy book, William S. Burroughs' Naked Lunch. It's not so much a novel as like a stream of consciousness tone poem that goes on for like 200 pages. Naked Lunch is a wild book. And associated with the beatniks was a Harvard professor named Timothy Leary. And that's Timothy Leary right there. Timothy Leary urged them on with the experimentation of psychedelic drugs, particularly marijuana and this new thing, lysergic acid dithylamide, LSD, acid. These were legal drugs at the time, and Timothy Leary became convinced that these drugs, especially acid, allowed people to ascend to higher planes of consciousness and to open your third eye and to directly communicate with God and find out profound truths of the self. Timothy Leary quit Harvard. He got fired from the University of California because he was making acid in his office. And he became the guru, the high priest of acid. He urged people to experiment with these mind-altering substances. And he often made the LSD himself. LSD is not hard to make, all right? And Timothy Leary wrote of these experiences, his trips while in these altered states of consciousness, exploring the spirit world, opening his third eye, and opening his soul to the conscious universe. And Timothy Leary urged people to drop away from society. None of this materiality matters. None of this conformity really matters. We should just embrace our higher selves, achieve higher levels of consciousness. And here's his most famous quote. The youth of America should not chase middle-class values. They should tune on, tune in, and drop out. But you know what? Don't believe me, all right? Don't believe what I'm saying. What you should do is listen to the words of Timothy Leary himself, the high priest of acid.
We tell young people today, drop out of school, because schools, education today, is the worst narcotic drug of all. Don't politic, don't vote. These are old men's games, impotent and senile old men that want to put you onto their old chess games of war and power. Drop out. Tune in with natural things. Take off your shoes. Get back in tune with God's harmony. Surround yourself with beauty and sacred objects. You can't get caught in the conforming, rote lockstep, which we call American society.
Now, here's my question to you, and I'm interested in your thoughts on the subject. Does Timothy Leary have a point here? All right? Does chasing all of this material affluence and middle-class values, does it really matter? All right? Should we just tune in, tune on, and drop out? Does Timothy Leary have a point? Or are his ideas just kind of an overreaction to the hard conformity of post-war America? Is Timothy Leary giving valuable advice on how to live your life? Or is he a product of a very specific time and distinct place? Can he be both? Or is he just a burned out drug wacko who dropped too much acid? Now, Timothy Leary does get a Beatles song named after him, though. The Beatles write a song all about Timothy Leary. And the song is, of course, Come Together, 1969. All right? All about Timothy Leary. Here come old Flat Top. He come grooving up slowly. He got Juju Eyeball. He won Holy Roller. He got hair down to his knee. Got to be a joker. He just do what he please. He wear no shoe shine. He got toe jam football. He got monkey finger. He shoot Coca-Cola. He say, I know you. You know me. One thing I can tell you is you got to be free. Come together right now over me. High Priest of Acid, Timothy Leary, developed an enormous following in the 1960s. He even developed allies, and some call acolytes. And we're going to talk about a couple of these acolytes. There they are, right there. Timothy Leary flanked by two of his closest allies, Abby Hoffman. We're going to talk a lot about Abby Hoffman. There's Abby Hoffman right up above me. And Jerry Rubin, sort of emergent leaders of this counterculture. And this all came together, the drugs and the rock and roll and the rebels and the nonconformity. These all combined with the Merry Pranksters. The rock and roll, the rebellion, the drugs, the dropping out, the ideology, the rejection of material things, the art, the aesthetic. The Merry Pranksters brought it all together. And this was featured in Thomas Wolfe's great book about the Merry Pranksters, The Electric Acid Kool-Aid Test. And they drove around the country in their psychedelic bus. They'd mix LSD into the Kool-Aid and pass it around. They're handing out acid. They're having sing-ins. They're playing music. They're hanging out with beatniks. They're sleeping with each other. It was the Merry Pranksters that kind of developed the aesthetic of the 1960s counterculture, or they popularized it at any rate. The long hair, the colors, the tie-dyed clothing, the drugs, the free love, the rejection of American culture, the embrace of poverty, the music, the art, the poetry, the wanderlust. And by 1967, it all came together. By 1967, it's all falling into place. You've got, the image of the rebel, rock and roll music coming together. That's with the Elvis, the king of rock and roll. You got the beatniks creating art and literature and poetry. You got Timothy Leary, the high priest of acid, injecting drugs into the whole mix. You've got the sexual revolution and free love, which we're going to talk about in a bit. You've got all that coming together, and it's all coming together into the Merry Pranksters. And from the Merry Pranksters, the rest of the youth of America are drawing these ideas and aesthetics together into 1960s counterculture. It is the Age of Aquarius. Reject the material, embrace the spiritual, reject the rat race, embrace yourself, embrace others. If you can't love if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. And it is the Age of Aquarius. And they embrace the Age of Aquarius. The tie-dyes, the long hair, the rejection of old values, the embrace across different races and ethnicities. They just want to create a new energy and a new place to be in, a new type of human be in. And what really fueled all of this was music. Music was just incredible. I mean, here are the Beatles. By the way, you can really tell when the Beatles got on drugs. That's the Beatles in 1965, and that's the Beatles in 1967. And I'm going to talk smack about the Beatles for a second. The Beatles kind of always were a bit derivative for everything they did. And there is the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour, basically a copy of the Merry Pranksters. The Beatles were copying what the Merry Pranksters were doing back in '67. And the music of this period is truly incredible. You can't fault them at all. You can bash the boomers for being oversexed, self-indulgent narcissists, but you can't deny the fact that they made some of the greatest music in all of American history. This is incredible music in this period. Jimi Hendrix, Keith Richards. Oh, there she is, my girl, Janis Joplin. This was truly incredible music. And all of this energy and inspiration and talent and effort went into creating some of the greatest music of all time. And this is absolutely not hyperbolic one bit. This really is some of the greatest music America ever made. And you would be well served, really well served, to, find a quiet corner or two, put on a pair of headphones, and listen to Jimi Hendrix. Put on an old Bob Dylan record. Again, I talk smack about the Beatles, but Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is one of the greatest albums ever made in America. The Doors, People Are Strange When You're a Stranger. And of course, the Texas songbird herself, Janis Joplin. Oh, Janis. All right. Don't believe me. Put on a pair of headphones, find a quiet couch, and just listen to an hour of Janis Joplin. It will make you a better person. And all along all of this is all that free love we were talking about. The sexual revolution. The free love movement, which is another total rejection of middle-class values of monogamy and chastity and propriety. All of that is gone. If you can't be with the one you love, baby, love the one you're with. And they viewed love and sex as things to be enjoyed and shared. Good sex is just like good music or good food or quality acid. It's something you pass around. It's something you share. Nudity, sex, all of this was welcomed. It was just another experience, a joy to be shared with the ones around you. Now, what triggered the sexual revolution? A big thing that triggered the sexual revolution was the invention of the birth control pill, which was released in May of 1960 and really allowed women a great deal of chemical control over their reproductive cycle. And this is how the pill works, all right? And it really hasn't changed that much since the 1960s. So you could have recreational sex with a very low chance of it producing a pregnancy. And it wasn't just the birth control pill. There it is. The world's creepiest drug advertisement right up above me. Poor Annette Funicello. Anyway, it wasn't just the birth control pill. It was also the fact that there were no major STDs in the 1960s. And what STDs there were could easily be cured by a shot of cheap penicillin. And going right along this, California legalized no-fault divorce in 1969, starting this period of marriages that are easy to get into and equally easy to get out of. Divorce, California style. And starting in 1967, abortion was legalized on a state-by-state-by-state basis before being made nationally legal in 1973. So free love is in the air. And part of the sexual revolution, the sexual revolution would birth what we call the feminist movement. It would birth the feminist movement of the 1960s and 1970s, what today we would call second wave feminism. And the connection between the sexual revolution and second wave feminism is right there, and it's right at the beginning. There's this very great quote by Gloria Steinem. A liberated woman is one who has sex before marriage and a job afterwards. And by the time we get to 1967, it's all there. It's all in place. And it starts with the human be-in, Timothy Leary, in San Francisco, January 14th, 1967. And look, they've got, all the this. Oh, there's Allen Ginsberg. There's Jerry Rubin, Santana, the Steve Miller Band. You should bring flowers and incense and feathers and candles and families and animals and cymbals and drums. And we're all going to play together. We're all going to dance together. It's going to move into the summer of love, 1967. It's all coming together. And there's really kind of 4 moments in the 60s counterculture that we're going to talk about quite a bit. I think we're going to do it in the next lecture, though. There's the Summer of Love, 1967. There's the March on the Pentagon that same year. There's the 68 Democratic Convention protests, and it culminates Woodstock, 1969. And for some of the flower children, this complete rejection of middle-class values came to a complete rejection of American society itself, a complete rejection of modernity. And these hippies said, we're not just going to pull back from the middle class, we're going to pull back from industrial society altogether. And these people withdrew from the world completely, moved into nature. They formed these communes in the countryside, trying to return to nature, to be self-sufficient, to own nothing, and to share everything, including each other. Now, these hippie back-to-nature communes were mostly in Northern California, but you could find these big hippie communes sort of scattered across the country. And as they did this, as they rejected the middle-class world their parents had built for them, their parents were largely completely baffled by what was happening with the counterculture. Some thought it was just a phase, but some were more tolerant, some were less tolerant. Look at that. Long hair is communism. But there are a lot of stories of parents completely disowning their children. Sons growing their hair long, embracing hippie lifestyle, and getting kicked out of the house and causing problems, forever. For the greatest generation, the people who went through the Depression and World War II and fought really hard to get into the middle class, all of this seemed very strange. All right. Their children are rejecting the middle class lifestyle that their parents had fought their entire lives to build for them. And the children largely ignored them because there's so many boomers. All right. Here's a great quote by Margaret Mead, who became kind of the unofficial anthropologist of the 1960s counterculture. Parents, she wrote, feel like immigrants in the country of the young. But there were hidden costs to all of this, especially with the sexual revolution. Many of these costs were not seen at the time, or the people who pointed out these problems were either mocked or ignored, if not both. Now, one of the things you're going to recognize right off the bat is, surprising absolutely no one, rates of sexually transmitted diseases both climbed rapidly during the 1960s and 70s, despite the fact that there were easy cures available at the time. I mean, gonorrhea and syphilis, gonorrhea increases enormously, and even the decline of syphilis levels off. And both of these diseases were easily cured. So even though that chart, stare at that chart right up above my head, even though these diseases were easily cured, they were having so much sex that still everybody got STDs. And then something weird happened. Something very strange happened. And it happened in May of 1969. A young black man named Robert Rayford dies in St. Louis. And he dies from something really weird. All right, nobody knows what disease this was. It's like, the cause of death was listed as lymphedema, but they didn't really know what killed Robert Rayford. It was weird. It's like he got sick, and it's like his entire immune system just shut down completely. Huh. And when somebody dies from something really weird, and they don't know what it is, they freeze the blood. They freeze blood samples so that in 10 or 20 or 30 years, they can figure out what you died of. And about 20 years later, they would figure out what killed Robert Rayford. Robert Rayford is the first American to die of AIDS. All right. And here's the thing with AIDS. Here's the thing with HIV and AIDS. You can get infected with HIV, but the virus can stay in you for decades, and you get sick 15, 20 years later after you've been infected. So a lot of these people having crazy wild sex in the 1960s and 70s, some of them are going to develop AIDS in the 1980s and 90s. So one of the products of this period of free love and sexual revolution will be paid in the next 2 decades. Did the sexual revolution create the AIDS epidemic? Yes. All right. It absolutely did. And it wasn't just STDs that are burning their way across the nation. This embrace of drugs fueled drug abuse, and drug-related mortality soars starting in the late 1960s. Look at that chart right up above my head. It was more or less stable in the 1950s, and then starts going straight up when all of these drugs start becoming popularized. And the government notices this, and the government starts saying, these are really powerful drugs that should not be taken willy-nilly recreationally. They arrest the high priest of acid. Timothy Leary gets a new title, the most dangerous man in America, and he is arrested in 1965. And poor Timothy Leary will eventually be arrested 36 times. And basically, Timothy Leary is going to spend the rest of his life in and out of jail. And Timothy Leary never backed down from his position. Drugs are cool. Drugs are cool. Drugs are great. They allow you to talk to the conscious universe. Just say yes. That was always Timothy Leary's position. And drugs took their toll even on the greatest musicians in American history. And a ton of these great musicians of the 1960s and 70s, they die of drugs. All right? The list of the dead is shocking and long. Alan Freed, the man who came up with the term rock and roll, dies in 1965. Cirrhosis, drank himself to death. Frankie Lyman, dead, 68. Heroin. Brian Jones, dead, 1969. Liver failure. Jimi Hendrix, dead, 1970. Barbiturates. Ooh. Janis Joplin, heroin, 1970. Jim Morrison, heroin, 1971. Ron McKiernan, 73. Alcoholism, drank himself to death. Mama Cass of the Mamas and the Papas, dead, 1974. Heart failure brought on by excessive drugs and alcohol. Tommy Bolin, 76. Heroin. Elvis Presley, dead, 1977. Heart failure from abuse of barbiturates. Keith Moon, 1978, tried to clean himself up, so he quit all these drugs cold turkey. Can't do it that way. Heart failure caused by withdrawal symptoms. So, the boomers created these great artists who created this great music, and drugs took all of that talent away. And more recently, there's been a series of interesting books. And there's been this series of really pointed critiques of the sexual revolution itself. Louise Perry's The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, or Christine Emba's Rethinking Sex. And I want to point this out. A lot of the new critiques of the sexual revolution are coming from women. All right. Now, these modern scholars are arguing that the sexual revolution didn't really liberate women. It simply played into the hands of men. That the sexual revolution allowed men greater sexual freedom at the expense of women. That the sexual revolution deconstructed and undermined the institution of marriage. That the sexual revolution led to the permissiveness of kink and pornography, and that it dehumanized women in general. And a lot of these modern women scholars point out that a lot of these old, institutions existed to protect women, and the sexual revolution swept all of that away. And one of the critiques is how the sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s demolished 100 years of courtship traditions and dating etiquette. Gone are the days of sock hops and dates at the soda fountain and dance tickets and evenings out with a chaperone sitting 2 tables over. That's all gone, all right? That was replaced not by a world of free love where you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. That's not the world that we live in. The sexual revolution didn't produce a world of free love where people sleep with whoever they want. Instead, what it seems to have produced is a harshly competitive sexual environment where a vast majority of single women pursue a tiny minority of single men. And, internet dating websites very easily can quantify this. 80% of women are chasing 20% of men. All right. And look at these ratings. And it's kind of interesting. If you look at that chart there on the lower left, one of the things it points out is that pretty much every man thinks that almost all women are attractive. But the vast majority of women think that most men are pretty ugly. All right. And this is the argument that's coming out of these modern critiques. Far from liberating sexuality, the argument is that the sexual revolution merely commodified it. It turned it into something that can be bought and sold. And I went online looking for I was thinking, I'll find a book or two about this thing called the sexual marketplace. I didn't find one book. I found 80. All right. And here's just some of these books I've found. People openly now discuss sexual market value. How to increase your sexual market value to attract the girl of your dreams. The Map, a personal guide to the sexual marketplace. Or whole podcasts are dedicated to this. The Rational Male, Sexual Marketplace Value. So there's something to this critique that the sexual revolution didn't liberate sexuality. It commodified it. And this is the world. But they didn't know any of that at the time. Let's go back to 1967. They don't know anything about that at the time. They are rejecting the world of their parents. They're rejecting the world of the 1950s. Sometimes they're rejecting industrial society altogether. They're rocking out. There's the high priest of acid in the middle of a rock show talking about how great drugs are. They're rejecting middle-class values. They're rejecting the rat race. They're making a break with modern human society, modern American society. But the real break with American society isn't going to come with drugs or sex or music. It's going to come in a little place on the other side of the world called Vietnam. And we'll go to Vietnam in the next time, and I will see you there.